So I did a spoiler-free review and breakdown of the first episode, but this one is going to be spoilerific. Full spoilers through to Winter's Heart, which is book 9 of the series. So if you read that far, you are good to watch this. I will not be going through and finding every single book reference and Easter egg, because that would take forever, and I'm sure there are a ton of videos that are already doing that. But what I am going to do is just talk about the book references and comparisons that were of particular interest to me. So, with that explanation out of the way, let's go.
Let's be nerdy with. Let's be nerdy. Let's be nerdy. Let's be nerdy with. Let's be nerdy with. Let's be nerdy. Let's be nerdy with.
We begin this episode with a monologue by Moraine about the breaking, and it's a very brief monologue, but I think it encapsulates the breaking and the current Aes Sedai perspective on it very well. When the scene was released, there was a lot of harumphing about the phrase, the arrogance. Something I found kind of odd, actually, because I think it's actually canon that Lews Therin was arrogant. He himself, in, like, Bran's memories, describes himself and his actions as arrogant. Also, I think it is very appropriate for the Third Age Aes Sedai to interpret his actions as arrogance. It just makes sense to me that that's how they would see it. But in all of the hubbub about the word arrogance, I somehow missed the next part. And I didn't notice it until I was watching the episode. It says, the female Aes Sedai were left to pick up the pieces. And again, we're getting the female Aes Sedai's perspective on this, but this is a way of thinking of things that I had not thought of before. Like, basically, the men made a mess, and the women had to clean it up, and are still, to this day, cleaning up that mess. Now, I do not identify as a red, although I find them probably the most practical, like, useful Aja, followed by the yellow. Like, every other Aja, you don't need to be an Aes Sedai to be a researcher, which is my Aja, or a person who thinks about logic, or, like, none of the other Ajas do you need to be a channeler to do. The reds, you need to be a channeler to do it. It is the most useful of the Ajas. But I always found the idea that they just inherently hate men. It doesn't feel natural to me. Like, I get it, the explanation works on paper, but I feel like it's an unreasonable stretch to go from 1% of men have a problem that only we can fix to, I hate all men. Like, I don't know, I find it unreasonable, which I think is the point, but it also just, it seems silly to me. But this way of thinking of things puts a spin on it that I hadn't thought of. That these women might still feel resentment for having to clean up the mess that these ancient male Aes Sedai made, and that the mess has continued for 3,000 years. I can see that resentment growing into bitterness, which then grows into hatred. That's a trajectory that makes more sense to me than we just hate men because we gentle them. Like, it's a better trajectory, and I like that the show has given me actually a new perspective on this. And we are less than a minute in, so let's go. I won't go into the whole dragon could be a boy or a girl thing, because I've talked about that before, except to say that I think it's a smart idea for the show. It gives some more ambiguity and more of a mystery for the audience. I do have to say, though, that aside from the Rosamund Pike in suspenders factor, which is just... thank you. But this cold open, and I do hope I'm using this term correctly. I'm not an expert in talking about television and stuff. But this cold open, as well as the next one, the Red Aja cold open, neither of them really landed with me. Like, I've rewatched this episode, of course, several times now, like taking notes, and the first 2 rewatches, I actually forgot that these scenes happened. Like, they came, I was like, oh yeah, this is how it starts. Oh, I forgot. There's nothing wrong with the scenes, and Kate Fleetwood as Leandrin she eats that scene right up, but neither scene pulled me in. The representation of madness as a hallucination of a person is interesting and could, foreshadow something coming later on. It's an interesting way to introduce the concept, but they're obviously going to have to do more with that. One of my favorite book references from the show is this short, like, intermediary scene that is obviously the ruins of skyscrapers. I, I have intentionally not watched other people's, like anyone else's, like at all, reactions to the episodes or breakdowns or anything because I'm trying to not have anybody else's thoughts taint my own thoughts about things. I'm gonna have a lot to catch up on when this is done. But I'm really curious to know if any non-book readers picked up on that, like, or if they just thought it was a cool landscape. I'm really curious. I'm looking forward to seeing if any of them caught that those are skyscrapers. That is like that was so cool. That was so cool. Another translation from book to screen that I was a huge fan of, it was, fleshing out the Two Rivers culture. The women's circle ceremony. We know in the books that the braiding hair means that a woman was now of marriageable age, but turning it into a whole coming of age ceremony and letting us see it, I loved this. And then jumping ahead to something that happens later on in the episode, the Beltane Festival. The melding of grief and celebration, I, I don't know, I just loved that whole thing. The idea that there is a time where we all, or they all, because I am not from Emmonsfield as much as I would love to be, have a time to collectively grieve their loss and then support each other through that grief. And then when they're done, they celebrate together. It seems like such an incredibly healthy tradition. And by healthy, I mean, like, it's good for your mental health. I don't know. I was a huge fan of both of those things. I was going to try and keep my thoughts in order of what happened in the episode, but I'm not sure that that's going to be possible because some of my thoughts sort of span the entire episode. So, okay, here's one of them. I tweeted the other day that one of the things that I'm happiest about is that the characters feel real and they feel like these characters that I've known and loved for so long. There is one exception to this, and that is Matt. Matt in the show does not feel like Matt in the books to me. He's still got some playfulness, but he's also darker. And a word that I used in a reaction to, I think, a trailer was that I said he had an edge to him that I wasn't expecting from him this early. And that is true in this episode. He's got an edge that Book Matt doesn't have, at least not at this point. And this is all, of course, stemming from the rather massive change to his backstory that they've made. Now, I do feel kind of indignant for the book versions of Abel and Natty Coffin. They were very cool people in the books, and their reputation is being dragged through the mud here. But aside from wanting to protect the reputation of fictional people, I'm okay with the change there because honestly, for me, at this point in the books, I don't feel like I know Matt at all. We only see him from the outside, from Rand's perspective, so I don't feel like I'm missing any of the things that I love about Matt. Matt is my favorite of the boys, which kind of makes sense because I see him as a mirror image of Nynaeve. I'm not missing Eye of the World Matt because Eye of the World Matt is kind of background until suddenly he's Dagger Matt. I think the change to his backstory makes sense for the show because they are obviously setting him up to have a massive reversal of fortune, right? Like, the very first scene shows him being unlucky with dice. Like, this is such an obvious setup for later on. It's almost, not quite, but almost too on the nose. There is one thing about how they've changed his character that I'm not a fan of, at least 3 episodes in. I don't like him being a thief. One of the things that I love about Matt, and it's the same in Nynaeve, like I said, I see them as kind of mirrors of each other, is that through all of the character growth that they have, one thing stays the same. They are both just inherently good people. Like, good. There's other words, but good just feels the best. Because if you just think about good as like a depth of something, that is like, they have a depth of goodness to them. Their moral code, their moral compass, it doesn't change. Their perspective, their confidence, their leadership abilities, their empathy, their ability to understand other people, all of that changes. But Matt at the beginning of the books and Matt at the end of the books, he will always help his friends, and showing him steal from a friend of his, it just made me sad for this aspect of Matt not being true. I think the idea is that he will show character growth and become the Matt that we know and love from the books, but I'm missing the idea of him always having had the same moral code, even if he wasn't necessarily aware of it. The change of everyone knowing that Moraine is Aes Sedai, I'm actually fine with. It's a very neat and tidy way to shorten her introduction. And also, it kind of makes sense in a world. Like, in the books, most of the places that Moraine goes, people recognize an Aes Sedai on sight. So it's kind of weird that no one in the Two Rivers does. I know it's part and parcel of them being super isolated, but it is also, obviously very intentional that RJ did it that way so that we readers could get an introduction to who she is and what an Aes Sedai is and what they do. You need to do that quicker for a show, and so this was just a very, neat and clean cut. This is not really relevant to anything, but I'm just going to say, called it! Henny Heiny! And the world just became a better, happier place. Aging up the characters, I think, was necessary for television, just so it didn't end up being, or at least appearing to be, a sort of fantasy high school drama. And, of course, aging them up then means sexy times for Rand and Egwene. I mean, I suppose they could have been having sexy times as teenagers in the books, but it would feel off to have a cast of very attractive 20-somethings and not have any hanky-panky happening, I'm honestly curious to see how this makes me feel as things progress, because actually having chemistry between Rand and Egwene is so new for me. I always forget that they were kind of a couple in the books. I literally people will mention it and I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot. Okay, now that I'm talking about aging up the characters and adult behavior, I suppose it's time to talk about the change that I really, really didn't like. The fridging. They invented a female character for Perrin to kill in order to further his character arc. It is the definition of fridging. That is her entire purpose in the story, and I don't like it. And I know that the writers were aware of this, not just because, they're writers and so they should be very aware of obvious cliches and tropes, but also I actually read a post on Reddit today by Brandon Sanderson where he talked about how this was the change that we all heard about a change that he was not a fan of. This was it. And he even told the writing team about this and that it might lead to, I think he called it the disposable woman trope, or the fridging trope, but they did it anyway. I think that they might be trying to do something interesting with her. My theory, just, based on the way Perrin was hugging her, is that perhaps she had a miscarriage or something and is grieving that loss. Like I said, that's based on, the way Perrin hugs her, but also the fact that Nynaeve seemed to know that there was something up there. And as wisdom, she would likely be aware if someone in town had some health problems or a miscarriage or something like that. Another theory I have is that something weird went on with the Trolloc attack. Perrin caught her and killed her with the backswing of the axe, but she was coming up behind him with a hammer raised over her head. Now, it's possible that she was coming to try and help to kill the Trolloc, but the angle seems weird and off for that, so it looks to me, it looks like she would have hit Perrin with the hammer, so there's a possibility that she was trying to kill Perrin during, the chaos of the Trolloc attack, which... Darkfriend? Maybe? I don't know. I have no idea, but it feels like they are trying to do something interesting to make it not just a simple fridging. And okay, if they do that, it will lessen the weight of the fridge, but it's still a fridge. It's still a woman invented solely for the purpose to be brutalized in order to further the arc of a male character. If you needed this to be in his story, if you needed him to accidentally kill someone, it didn't have to be his wife. It didn't have to be a woman. Perrin had siblings, those are canon. He could have killed one of his younger brothers, his cousins. What if he had killed Harl Luhan? That would have been brutal and heartbreaking, especially for us book fans. I still don't know that Perrin needed this in his story arc, given what I know happens later with him, but I don't know if they're going to have him kill White Cloaks in a wolf-induced rage. Maybe this is it. It didn't need to be his wife. They made a female character and then they built a fridge to put her in. I do not like this change. Okay, I've talked about this long enough. Another change that I'm curious about, Nynaeve knows that she can channel. She knows that listening to the wind is channeling. What does this mean about her block? I can't imagine that they would change that part of her story. Nynaeve's block is such a huge part of her arc, but I don't know. This is one of those things where I think I know where they're going, but I have no idea how they plan to get there, and I'm really curious about it. I have zero theories. I do have theories, or I suppose speculations is a better term, about that previous wisdom that Nynaeve mentions. That wisdom could channel, and if we are pulling channeling rules out of the books, then we know that that wisdom did not go to the tower, so she didn't take the oaths, so she could have lived for a very long time. If she went to the tower when she was 13, then that could literally be hundreds of years ago. She could be misremembering or lying about being rejected by the tower, or perhaps her ability to channel was too weak for the White Tower, which would mean that she would live for less time, I think. So, I don't know. All of these are possibilities. Unreliable narrators are a hallmark of this series, so Nynaeve saying that this is what happened is in no way a confirmation that that is actually what happened. Then we've got the Winter Night battle, and okay, I had trouble watching this because of how gory it was, and I mean that in a good way. I do not handle gore well. I have once vomited in a movie theater because of how gory things got for me. I didn't know it was possible to be so disgusted by something that you saw that you threw up until it happened to me. So, if I'm completely honest, I don't know that I've actually seen the full Winter Night battle scene because I just kept closing my eyes or looking away. But I think I've seen enough of it to say that A, the fight choreography it's pretty impressive, and B, I love how synchronized Moraine and Lan are. They work in tandem, and it's amazing. Also, there's this moment at the end of the fighting where Moraine is gathering in the power, and I was so, like, pleased, relieved even, to see that they showed that Lan was still fighting around her, that the fighting didn't pause while she did that. That happens so often, like, while the hero is, gathering their strength or whatever, that the enemies just wait for them. So I don't know. It always looks dumb. It always irritates me in movies, and I was happy to see that they didn't do that here. I did, though. I found the women killing the Trollocs with pitchforks. I found that scene cheesy. I know what they were going for. I'm sorry. It felt cheesy to me. I love it in theory. It felt shoehorned in. Okay. Another moment that cheesy isn't the word, actually. Another moment that felt rushed to me was Rand's kind of outburst to Moraine. It comes literally right after she heals his dad, without any offers or, like, demands for payment or whatever you want to call what happens in the books. She just heals his dad, no questions asked. And then he accuses her of bringing the Trollocs, or kind of accuses her of bringing the Trollocs. I can stretch it in my mind to make it make sense, but that's just it. In order to make it feel natural, I have to do a bunch of intermediary stuff in my head. It doesn't flow naturally in the scene. I think if they had done more to establish the suspicion of the Aes Sedai, I don't know, it would have felt more natural. Like, maybe if they'd had Rand and Tam talking about it in that scene, but right before the Trolloc attacked, like, could have had, like, a brief conversation where Tam warns Rand about the Aes Sedai. Something like that would have done enough, I think, to add to that, to make his accusation of her literally right after she saves his dad's life feel more natural. Because it just felt like, that was really rude, Rand. Why did you do, like, that's literally, I felt indignant. But it didn't make sense. It didn't feel natural to me. And then it's immediately followed by another scene that feels rushed to me. But this one I kind of get, because I think lengthening it would have felt like filler. Like, I think it was a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. The whole we gotta go moment, having them actually discuss it more would have, I think, felt excessive, because the conclusion that they came to would have been that Maureen was right. And so, yeah, just get to the point. It just felt like it happened super fast, and then the episode is over. Like, it felt abrupt. But, I adored the voiceover at the end. Like, literal actual goosebumps on my arms when I heard Moraine say those, the iconic lines, from the books. It was incredible. other sundry thoughts. The description of the Aes Sedai, like the prophecy. This is a very minor change to the magic rules, but it jumped out at me actually. Guitarra Moroso, eyes so white she couldn't see. She was blind. In the books, women have to be able to see the weaves in order to weave. In order to, channel. Apparently this rule doesn't apply in the show, which is interesting. Other thoughts? I think the cast is killing it. I've been really happy and pleased to hear other people say that Zoe Robbins is a standout, because I wasn't sure if it was true or if it was just my bias, because to me she is like doing incredible. She's knocking it out of the park, but I don't know if that could just be me being like, it's naive. But other people have said it too, so I think it's actually true. I don't know. I think she's perfect. Marcus Rutherford had already taken over my headcanon, just from like that image of him, that initial image. But seeing him in the role, he fits it perfectly. For me, those two are the standouts as far as fitting the roles. The others are amazing too. Like Rosamund is definitely filling Moraine's shoes, and Daniel is a stoic Lan, and Maddie's got Egwene's eagerness, and Yasha is already giving me angsty Rand already, and Barney. All right, well, I've already talked about how Matt feels different, so I don't quite know how to place him in his character, but he's doing a good job. It's just Zoe and Marcus are the top for me. But okay, those are my spoilery thoughts about the first episode. Let me know yours in the comments below. Or you can join my Discord and we can talk it out there. I will link that as well in the description below. And if you like my content and want to support me, you can always check out my Patreon. Will be linked in the description below. Sincere thank you to all of my patrons. I am so grateful to all of you. And with that, I will end this here. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!